Throughout my career, I've repeatedly found myself surprised when something that I consider a little tip or trick can change somebody's life. Uh, they can often be something anonymous, but it shaves maybe a couple seconds off the work that they do, but they do it so many times a day it actually happens. The aim of this talk is to show you some things that will be directly useful, inspiration for removing little bits of friction from your day, and little ways of abusing yourself. In case you're wondering, who is this bearded beauty performer? Hi, I'm Waldo. I used to be a productive member of society, but now I'm a tech evangelist for Datadog. Many of these will obviously come as a result of my experience. I come from an ops background. I'm sure, regardless of what you do, you'll be able to come up with ideas for how to make your life better than the other ones. Over my career, I've been all over the OS map. But for the past several years, my daily drivers have been Macs. For a long time, I used Bash. When a few friends started crystallizing CSH, I gave it a shot. And honestly, it didn't take me long to really appreciate it. Even 7 years later, I strongly prefer it for many of the little things it does. All my examples will mostly be in ZSH, which I also use with my OS 09 ZSH plugin. Most, but not all of this, will work as is in Bash with any other shells. Personally, off the top of my head, the only discrepancy I can think of is that ZSH can handle a range differently. But that's should be fairly minor to me. I'm also going to show you some examples in PowerShell, as well as other apps for which dotfiles can be applied. In older terminals, it's their long evolved life cycle is apparent from all the different configuration options of places where you can store your shell configuration. If you compare Bash's tree on the left with ZSH's inclusion tree on the right, you can see how much simpler ZSH's inheritance path is. Bash evolved over a long time, a lot of hands involved, where I assume that ZSH learned from many of these decisions and results, and actually learned something from this. But the next obvious question is, what are you even talking about? In short, a dotfile is a general term for a configuration file, which usually lives in the root of your home directory. Its file name is typically preceded by a period or dot. That dot, by default, makes it hidden for most file viewers and shell listings. But by triggering the show hidden files option in your file browser, or say using ls with a -a flag, you can see these files. Next most obvious question is, why would I go to the effort? I'll show you plenty of reasons and examples, but for me, laziness, saving mental capacity, and reducing friction are my personal biggest reasons. Some of these things I'm going to discuss briefly considered accessibility issues. But if you've known me for any length of time, you've probably heard me say I consider myself a fundamentally lazy person. As such, I like to make my dotfiles as universal as possible. There are some behaviors that I expect and want when I'm working on a map that just don't apply anywhere else. And in those cases, I can isolate their behaviors in an OS-specific code block that's this. For instance, here, I'm defining the way that my arrow keys work with modifiers in my typical terminator emulator, ITerm2. This doesn't need to be done in other emulators, but I like ITerm2, except its default behavior. Now, the setting doesn't need to be applied on Windows or Unixes, so it only happens when I happen to be on the Mac. Another instance of conditionals is when I want to use the same ZSH file at home as well as at work. Any work-specific items such as environment variables, application options, keys or such can be stored in a specific .work file that I store elsewhere. In this particular case, I'm basing the condition of whether this is a work machine on the computer's DNS servers. You can do this for anything, whether it's establishing different contexts or projects where you'd like to establish different working norms for different projects you might be looking at. You can use this to isolate environment variables and functions to different specific tasks. It's even helpful to change the appearance of your terminal to use different color schemes to signify these other things. When I was a Windows app, I had to elevate my privileges. So having my terminal turn red was really helpful just to make sure I didn't do the wrong thing in the wrong place, or the right thing in the wrong place, or whatever. So when referring to file paths in the Unix family, we often learn that using the tilde is a shortcut for your home directory. This is really convenient when you're typing things, typing commands. When you're scripting, especially customizing Dotfiles, I strongly encourage that you can have it using the environment variable home instead. There are some cases I haven't nailed down exactly where they're at, but they've been me enough times that I've gotten in this habit because the tilde shortcut doesn't always exist or work as expected in certain scripted files. Now, due to many factors, not least of which has been many years of indirect work, my memory is a great for things like command. Fortunately, my laziness is what they are. As an ops person, it can be important to figure out where all of this space went. I like pictures, and I cannot lie. But I can't be bothered to remember this command. So I made a shell error. Whether neurological damage, or laziness, or something else, I've developed this weird habit of typing W after typing EA. No idea why, but it's more important to me that I get the computer to do what I want than to give me perfect typos. And since it's a consistent type, I just make an alias for what I want it to really do. And this is an example, if you kind of squint and twist your head, that you can see this as an accessibility issue. Maybe somebody suffers a stroke, or some damage where their typing needs to become unreliable. Let's roll the command and make common typographic mistakes easier to deal with. You may not know this, but I spent much of my early career in Linux. And while I think that most of Windows command syntax is done, I strongly prefer to clear the terminal with CLS and type out the word clear. I don't know how these two got twins that were swatched at birth or something. And I'm annoyed that the Unixes make you type it out. It's stupid, but no longer. Sometimes in life, you can only reply with a shrug. I can't be bothered to remember the keystrokes, so I make it easy on myself. And in this particular case, you may notice that this is rather than being an alias, this is a function. In reality, function isn't just taking any arguments, so it could just as well be. In fact, you can still pass arguments to aliases, but functions do tend to give you more control. So after I shrug, how do I get that to the text box? I can use a mouse, but I'd rather type it into a command TV copy, where I can likewise paste that into the appropriate app. There's also an equivalent app called TV Paste. Now these are built-ins in maps, but they're available as named common Linux. Really stupid, simple apps. If you like using Xorgs, you might be able to unwire that damage and start using those. Sometimes you just need to flip a table. Like the shrug, this is more for amusement or frustration. And again, it could just as easily have been an alias. Sometimes you can't find that table you want to flip. More specifically, you can't remember if it was flipping or throwing or a table or a desk. I can tell you, things more frustrating than not being able to express your frustration. So it's solved. Aliases to the rescue. I can flip and throw things all I want. Now, unless you think my entire talk is about frustration. Sometimes you get in a wind that calls for a little dance. Several years ago, I left the frozen hellscape that is upstate New York for the hellish swampscape that is Central Florida. One of the upshots is that this is the only skill that I have to deal with now. And I can have as much or a little as I want by this document. I didn't write this, but I forgot to say, I saved the URL for attribution. But get back to practicality. I used to run Graphite a lot. It's an open source metrics visualization tool. And in Graphite, metric paths are not separated, but that they correspond to directories on the system's file system. So I wrote these two simple functions that convert metric paths, file paths, and vice versa. This is not a hard command, but it's something that saved me a few seconds and preventing me from flubbing my type many times every day. After later on, I worked at a Kubernetes consultancy, and I kept breaking instances. At the time, they didn't validate YAML. Whatever you set up, went onto the servers. So I thought it might be a good idea to keep myself from breaking things by pushing invalid YAML. So this really simple function saved me countless times just by making sure that my YAML was valid. However, the real win was when I included this function in my Git recommit posts for those relevant retards. Before, as I went to check in, it would run this and it would cancel the commit if it didn't come back clean. If it had invalid YAML, it wouldn't allow the commit to go through, and I could fix it before anybody else saw it. Typing is hard. Less of it. Now, something like this was super helpful when working on a large team on the same thing. This kept me from causing unnecessary merge conflicts when I didn't do all the steps in exactly the right order. Needless to say, it wasn't any of our jobs to really get experts. So sharing this with my team saved us a lot of time and energy and frustration, especially collectively, once I shared that with the team. Yeah. Useful. It's cool. What if we added column? But we don't have to type anything extra. Now, which do you prefer? Of course, we're back to accessibility again. It's not much help if you're red-green colorblind, but guess what? You can customize color dim with a Dotfile. Speaking of color being great, what color has man paper? Again, it may help you, it may not, but I happen to think it's nice. This option is courtesy of boards. I forgot that. See, I showed color. That's my placeholder. Every so often, a newsletter, actually, like a mailing list I sign up for, actually contains something that I surprisingly want to read. Unfortunately, they feel compelled to redirect the hell out of it. Thwarting this idea, we have ad blockers. Hooray! But I still actually want to see the content. So here's a quick solution. Again, not difficult, but I use curl to make recursive head calls for all the 301 and 302 redirects. And it runs down all of them until you get to the final URL. This is fine as is, but I've got one improvement that I want to make. I'd like to split the result, that final result, on an ampersand there. You either split those on different lines or polarize them differently. So, like for instance, YouTube links, especially coming from a video or marketing, will have all kinds of garbage in there and additional parameters that you go, oh, it would be nice to know. Add a much easier plans. Which ones I actually want to keep it include. So, which, not yesterday, but which of these things is a simple command that tells you where on the file system the command that you're typing is coming from. This is useful, especially when you want to run, say, a specific version of Python. You also probably want to make sure that you're not using like the system installer and that your shell is calling on the installation that you expect. But which doesn't cover functions. It'll just say it's a function and shrug at you. And it won't even be pasted. But you can write a function called something I call mine whence, or that uses whence and pipe. Two commands that I totally knew about before having a Zelda project. And these will tell you exactly where that command, where that function is defined. So far, I've been talking Unix native tools. You can do the same in PowerShell. Of course, Microsoft being Microsoft, they tend to call them profiles, and they use really stupid and awkward file paths, but it is essentially the same thing. Personally, I haven't used PowerShell in a really long time, but there are a few examples that I found useful, or at least replicate behavior I like having in Unixes. I've got a couple from that. So one of my favorite things about PowerShell, aside from just being the bluest shell out there, is its alias system. It's got all this built in. Its alias system is good. Now, here are a few that I found useful for my then favorite editor, Notepad++. There are a couple. There are also a few saving typing options, and of course, an alias for which. One of my coworkers chuckled when I made the Notepad++ reference, and to be honest, I haven't used it in a long time. But I was really happy to see it's been cutting releases all the time, even pretty frequently. So if you'd like something a little simpler, that's a fine option. At the time, I was also testing out Sublime Text. And I was also doing a lot between Windows and Unix. So like I was all across the operating system. So what that meant was I had to use PuTTY to get a fair amount of things done. And PuTTY's fine, but the tendency to put a P in front of SCP or SSH just irritated the crap out of me. So I fixed that again. Finally on there, Windows doesn't have its own uptime command. I don't know why, the assumption of what we do is recent, but I wrote one in VB script in it. Now, of course, if I'm making a directory, I probably want to use it quickly. So, and I also got to have this command just as much in Windows as I do in the Unix. So I gave PowerShell the same option. It's just as stupid simple as the Unix one, but it throws me off on any machine that I'm using that doesn't. Need a pseudo equivalent? Here you are, PowerShell. This, thanks for this goes out to Piotr Stop. Almost certain it's saying that right. And our friend Pierre Roman, who's a developer advocate at Microsoft. He finds it useful to share his PowerShell history across multiple machines. He bounces forth between machines and likes to be able to call back to the commands he's run recently. So he wrote this little gem that saves his file to OneDrive across all these machines. Now, of course, Dotfiles are for much more than just shell. Any command that you can use via the command line, you should look to see if they have a Dotfile or config options that can be invoked automatically. Well, Emacs is the king of these, being a great OS and a good piece of editor. Vim has some settings that I want changed from default. So here, I'm just setting a color scheme that I can live with some UI options. I like having braces, friends, and brackets matched. Pretty simple. There are a couple more options, interface options, and it makes the backspace look like I expect. I am not online. Yeah, I'm curious. I haven't used MongoDB in a long time either. But for something, yeah, it's very, at least used to be fairly common to use this ELI. When you're administrator. Now, uptime and the counts of documents in a database are useful info, but again, it's more than I want to have to remember. So making aliases for those, but making built-in commands saves me some cognitive load. And here's how I went about customizing my Mongo prompt, making sure I knew which host I was on and whether it was currently a primary or a secondary node. So we finally come to, how do we manage these? Where do we store them? Out of laziness, I don't like having multiple copies of Dotfiles. So I use symlinks, which point to files in a Git repo that is stored in a common file sharing application, whether OneDrive, Google Drive, Dropbox, whatever. So in addition to not having to copy and manage files separately, I don't need to hunt down the repo itself to make changes. I do have to, when I'm ready to commit, when I'm happy with how it is, I do have to make that step. I also have a shell function that can take me right to my .files repo. Note here that the .files in my home directory are symlinked to files in my file system path. You can certainly use dotted files in your repo, but I personally find it easier to not make them hidden and put .dash in front of the main part of the name. I don't change machines often enough to make it worthwhile, but you do have options if you want to automate the installation of your .files. Some utilities have popped up, as well as such as yet another .files manager. Apologize for my French, but I think it's Chez Moi, and .bot. So you do you, boo. Our time together has been a very brief dip into what you can do with .files. From here, I encourage you to look for little improvements that you can make in your daily life. Look around for .files articles and repos for inspiration and steal. I have been and will continue to be Waldo. And here are some ways that you can reach me. I'll link to my .files repo and how you can find an article or three about .files on opensource.com. And remember, any improvements you make, other people may find radically change their life, as simple as it is. So with that, thank you very much.